Okay.
All right. All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Museum of Art's first gallery talk with Enrico Riley. I'm Sarah Claflin, Education and Communications Manager for the museum, and I'll be the moderator for today's talk. I just wanted to run through the format so that everybody knows what to expect. First of all, everyone should please be sure to mute yourselves while we're in this session. And just so everybody knows, we are recording the talk today. So the format for this talk will be as follows. I'm going to do a brief introduction for Enrico, and then I'm going to hand it over to him, and he's going to present a 10 to 15 minute PowerPoint presentation about his work and his studio practice. Following that, we'll open it up to questions and answers. Please use the chat section to type your questions, and I'll ask the questions to him and he can respond. Today's talk is going to end by 1 p.m. So let's begin. First of all, Enrico, welcome. Thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. I know you are getting ready for your semester, which begins next week, and learning all new things on how to communicate with your students. And so I really appreciate your time, and it's nice to see you even if it's virtually.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Christina, for having me. I'm going to just sort of get the PowerPoint set up, and then I'll share my screen.
Sure.
Before I get started, I'm just going to run through maybe 13 slides. We just have a few minutes, and I'll just sort of outline sort of the current sort of work that I'm working on. And then we can just open it up for questions. And I hope people have a lot of questions that I can try to answer. So let me get the PowerPoint set
Okay,
up.
and I can do my like 4 lines of just introducing you briefly, and then
Oh, yeah,
just turn it over to you. So I just want people to know like where you're from and your credentials. So Enrico earned his BA in Visual Studies from Dartmouth and an MFA in painting from the Yale School of Art. He joined Dartmouth College in 2001, teaching drawing and painting, and currently chairs the Department of Studio Art. Riley's work has been shown in museums, galleries, and cultural centers throughout the United States and Europe. He has a long and distinguished list of awards and honors, including a Guggenheim Fellowship and a Rome Prize. He's also represented by Jenkins Johnson Gallery in Brooklyn, New York, and the museum and Christina have worked very closely with this gallery to present his current works on view today. And we just want to give a nice thank you out to Karen and her team in Brooklyn, getting the work here, working through COVID. It's been a challenge, but it's been a real pleasure to hang his work on the wall and see it. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Enrico. And again, please keep your Zoom on mute and type in the chat and I'll see it and we'll administer it that way. So is everybody thumbs up good? You can hear us good? Awesome. All right, Enrico, over to you.
Okay. Let's share my, let's see. So, Sarah, I think you need to allow me to
okay.
share again.
Hold on one sec. Sorry, it doesn't say that. Me and Enrico actually did a little test run and we were good.
We were.
We were good. Please believe me. Hold on one sec.
And
it's not allowing me to.
Yeah. The host again?
Yeah, it's not allowing me to host. I'm sorry, everybody. We honestly did do this. Could I share it for you?
Sure.
Okay, and then you can just tell me if you need to advance.
Okay, what would be the best way to do that?
Just say, Sarah, advance.
Okay, so you can advance my screen just from where you are?
Yeah, I'm going to share it with everybody.
Okay. Okay.
There we go.
Is that okay? Great.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll just get started. Again, Sarah, thanks very much, and Christina, thank you. I'm just going to run through again just a few works. They start in 2015, though many of the sort of preparatory drawings that preceded the paintings really began in 2014. I was really trained as an abstract painter and began to make a transition in my work probably around 2012, 2011. There was a real urge to get a sense of drawing back in my work. And previous to about 2011 or so, I had been working primarily in a sort of post-minimal, very sort of restrained kind of way, making paintings that were really sort of transcriptions of American jazz scores, and then also there was a body of work that were transcriptions of star constellations. And those works began to evolve. The canvases began to become shaped. And I took that all as a signal that I really needed more in my painting practice by way of drawing. So there was another sort of transitional body of work in between those post-minimal paintings and this first painting here. That transitional body of work very much was linear, very much coming out of a sense of drawing. You can still feel some of that in this first image here, the sense of outline, really the linear aspect present in the painting. But there was a kind of form or a mass that I was also longing for in the work. And sort of that sort of formal desire, along with in 2014, I think many of the videos that we were as a nation seeing with regards to police violence, specifically against black citizens, really pushed me to sort of address those issues. And I think my relationship with that sort of base issue, but I think the whole constellation of social issues that that for me sort of are embedded in that. So this painting is called Untitled, a very old game revisited. Again, it's from 2015. It's about 60 by 48 inches. There's a bit of a move in this work back to, at least in the early parts of the work, a slightly more earthy palette. Again, just a very formal way to try to reduce the number of variables that I would have to sort of work with, you know, trying to get a little bit of mass on the form. Sarah, if you can advance to the next slide. So I'm jumping ahead here. There's a whole bunch of work from that first sort of slug of work. This jumps ahead to 2017. This is called Untitled, Remembrance of Things Present. It's 61 inches by 74 inches. Again, oil on canvas. At this point, I was actually in Rome. I had applied for a Rome Prize in 2016 and was fortunate enough to be awarded a place at the American Academy, really applying with the body of work sort of exemplified by that last slide. That body of work was called Infinite Receptors. And really, sort of historically and formally, I was trying to make a connection between the sort of present and past experiences of Black Americans and then looking at Judeo-Christian paintings and looking at some of the depictions of violence in terms of subject matter, but also I think looking at compositional issues that I found interesting in the painting. And all this really by way of Philip Guston, really looking at Philip Guston and thinking about his historical antecedents, and using that as a way to sort of mine those sort of older medieval and early Renaissance and Baroque paintings. So this painting was done in Rome, sort of at the later half of that year. It's both an interior and a landscape sort of combined. There are these sort of tulips in the front with some symbolism with regards to royalty and that color. There's this weird sort of emblem behind the figure, which it sort of appears as a man, but I imagined the figure as a female figure and imagined really the painting being based off a Pietà, sort of a mother and a child, the child sort of being laid out on that table, either examination table or possibly it's a wake or a funeral. But behind that, there are those sort of three vertical elements, and then there's a sort of a moon or sort of some sort of object in the back, celestial object in the back, and really that's just sort of a symbolism and a sort of nod to this idea of the crowd and this idea of violence. And I won't really sort of unpack the paintings too much, but those are sort of some of the issues that I'm trying to wrestle with, and then maybe a glimpse into how I'm trying to, or at least at the time was trying to format them into a visual language. Sarah, if you could go to the next slide. This is just an untitled drawing. The entire drawing is about 8.5 by 11, but I sort of inset it in this little small sort of frame. So I've just sort of cropped in on the actual framing of it. And this is a really good example of the drawings. I have hundreds and hundreds of these drawings that really precede the paintings and are really actively sort of being made. And then from them, I begin to mine them for the compositions of the paintings. Sarah, you can advance. Jumping back a little bit, this is called Untitled Midnight Hunting. This is from 2015. Again, there's some familiar elements. There's a fence that winds up coming up in many of the paintings. There's that sort of three-fingered or three-digit foot. There's the back end of a dog, a gun barrel, and a horn. And then there's a ghost. There's a ghost of a horn that was painted out that you can also see just on the upper edge of the painting. This is 60 by 64. Sarah, you can advance. Again, jumping ahead. This is called Untitled, Martyr, and Into the Hold. This is from 2018. This is 48, a little bit smaller, 48 by 36. Expanding some of the setting to encompass the middle passage and trying to make a connection between that kind of historical violence and the present tense violence that unfortunately, is still very present with us. Okay, Sarah, you can advance. Just sort of going through these a little bit quickly because I know we have just a short period of time. This one is called Untitled Evening, the Night Watchman. This is from 2019. It's 58 by 53. In Rome, for the first time, I really began to use photographs as a tool. Up until that point, everything was really being made. All the paintings were really being generated from the drawings, and all the drawings are generated from my imagination. And in Rome, I think there's a painting that I worked on there that I used the hand from a Piero painting as a model for one of the elements in the painting. And it was really interesting and a revelation because it really took some of the pressure off of me having to invent everything and then having to imagine the light source and the form and how that would all play out. This is sort of a composite. This is from a drawing, the fence, the torches, that sort of noose kind of tool and the gun barrel. The background was made up after the fact. And then the hand in the upper left corner and that bucket are all sourced from photographs that I found. And so, really sort of compositing these different elements together to form that one image. And I just bring that up because it's really a sort of a really big issue in my work now, trying to navigate how much to use the photographs, where they're going to be placed, and just how to utilize them as a tool. I think they're a really great tool to use, but there's a sort of a constant sort of, at least for me, a constant sort of navigation between photographs that either I take or I find, and then graphic elements from the drawings that I create. Sarah, you can go forward. Yeah, this is called Untitled Witness, Skywalker, the Symbolic Importance of Flight. Again, oil on canvas. This is from 2020. I think I finished this just in January, I believe. Again, the work is evolving as I'm making it. I think at this point, I'm really loath to box myself into a corner about exactly what the work is about or exactly what the formal ramifications of the elements in the paintings are, because it's extremely emerging. The work just is constantly sort of changing and emerging. And I might run off 4 or 5 paintings that are in a relatively similar sort of style or aesthetic, and then I feel compelled to sort of question that and adding or taking out an element. So the telephone poles sort of migrate into this painting. I really think of this as an angelic figure, really a witness to, in my mind, a witness to American history, just a witness to what has been going on. And then, there's an attempt to bring this figure more clearly into the contemporary realm with those sneakers and the telephone poles and that sort of strange sort of Nike sort of figure, which sort of like a half crescent moon. Sarah, you can go forward. Untitled, Rhythming Resistance Through Music. I'm a really big jazz fan, really a great fan of the pianist Thelonious Monk, and that's a really great song of his called Rhythmaning, which is hard to pronounce, but I just find the whole, not only the word itself, the title of the song, but also the song just really quite inspiring and amazing. So in a way, as the work evolves, there's an attempt to try to not just have the work focus on the unfortunate, violent sort of history of the African American experience, but also think about, some of the more, at least for me, interesting contributions, and maybe we'll say byproducts of the whole experience. So certainly music, and I'm again a big fan of music in general, but jazz as a genre. And so I wanted to sort of fit that in. And so there's a reference to a horn. There's a reference to marching bands. There's an attempt to talk about how that kind of expression can be a resistance. And then there are these sort of weird little surrendering flags that are off there on the right. And the card in the bottom is really purely an aesthetic sort of decision that I had to put in there. Okay, Sarah, you can go ahead. I'm just going to sort of go through quickly the last few, and that'll leave us some time for questions. This is a large painting. It's called Untitled, Music, Rhythming, Keeping Time, Time Travelers. There's a lot packed into a lot of the titles of the work as a way or a tool for the viewer to think about how possibly to think about the paintings. And they're also a way for me to sort of notate what I was thinking about emotionally when making the work. This is 70 by 80 inches. And I won't go through and explain too much. It's pretty self-explanatory. What I might say is you can start to feel some of the drawing beginning to tighten up relative to increased use of photographic source material and imagery. You can go to the next slide. That last slide was from 2020. This is from 2019. I think this is called Untitled Divine Future. Female form, thinking about the importance of women both within the African American community, but I think in general, I think it's a subject that I'm trying to paint about because I find it extremely important. And it's difficult for me to paint about it. So this is an attempt, again, from 2019. Sarah, you can go ahead, the next slide. This is called Untitled, Blue Skies at Sea. This is from 2019. Reference to music. I think the figure is on a ship. That's how I envisioned it, but there's also sort of an openness to the reading of the painting. Go to the next slide. This is also from 2019. And the last few, I think, are a bunch of paintings that are all dealing with this issue or this sort of metaphor of playing cards. Um, again, there's a lot of variation in the work, and I think the way I work is I'll sort of work on a few paintings for a while, and then I'll come back and revisit them. And these card player paintings really started in 2019, and then there are a whole bunch of other paintings in between, and then I've been coming back to them. This one's 58 by 53 inches. I'm really thinking about card playing as a metaphor for risk, as a metaphor for uncertainty, and a metaphor for the kind of sort of tightrope walking, kind of navigating that one finds themselves doing. And I'll really want to reiterate that even though the work is really centering around issues that are specific to the African American community, the work really wants to be thought of in a universal way. So these are issues that many people and many groups of people are dealing with or have dealt with. And I'm just trying to deal with them through this very specific lens, but there are a lot of devices that I'm using in the paintings to not, in the composition of the paintings, to not have them you know, really speak specifically about sort of fault or blame or a kind of accusation. So I just wanted to mention that. Sarah, you can go to the next painting. Untitled card player, Hope for the Future. Again, 58 by 50 inches. I think there's one more painting after this one. Sarah, you can advance. Yeah, this one's called Untitled Card Players, Riches of the Past, Present, and Future. And this is a bit larger. This is also 70 by 80 inches. So I'll really just sort of stop there. I wanted to give you just a little bit of an idea of the trajectory of the work from 2014 up until now. And there's a lot of other paintings that I haven't shown that you know, that fall in between these paintings. But that's just a bit of a snapshot right there. And then even, I think if you go to the gallery, you can even see some changes in the work relative to the drawing as well. So, so yeah, I'll really end there. And please, if anyone has questions, I think, Sarah, I think you're gonna mine them from the chat room.
I sure am, and we have plenty, I think. Let's see, we have one from our board of advisor, Marilyn. She's asking, do you think a white person who sincerely condemns violence to Black people could paint pictures on these themes, or is that not a good idea today or ever?
Oh, jump right into the deep end there. You know, I mean, I think it's amazing that we live in a place where there is freedom of expression and freedom of speech. And so I would never say that someone sort of cannot, you know, paint about that. I think a few years ago, Dana Schutz had a painting in the Whitney Biennial that was based on an Emmett Till photograph. And Dana is Caucasian, an amazing world-class painter. And she caught a lot of heat for that painting. Really sort of getting at your question. I think there would have to be, it just depends on how it's done. You know, I think if you can paint about these things, ideally from your point of view, and sort of through the lens of your body, then I think any subject is really open. I ask myself that question whenever I'm trying to make paintings about the female form. I really ask myself a lot of questions about how it's being depicted, and just sort of what the image is doing, because it's really tricky terrain. Some artists don't care; they just will paint what they want to paint, or do what they want to, and if they catch some heat, they catch some heat. Yeah, I think a Caucasian person, a white person, could paint about this. It's just sort of how it's done that would be, would be the point.
Great. All right, next question, Enrico. I believe this is from a student.
Mm-hmm.
How did you develop your studio practice? Organization of thoughts is difficult to me. Do you have any suggestions?
No. It's a really great question. I still feel like I have way too many thoughts and way too many ideas. I think I've tried different strategies in my development. I'm 46, almost 47, and I think what I know from this point is you first have to try to start the process of understanding sort of your own machinery, like sort of how your mind works and sort of your temperament, and how that interfaces with your work. And by that, I mean, you could be a very slow, careful, methodical painter, or a very expressive, fast painter. And I think neither is better than the other, but you need to try to figure out where you fit in that spectrum. And what I would say, and actually what I'm sort of coming to, is not to censor yourself, I think, in the act of making, but rather, and Christina can attest to this, I think curating after the fact might be the key. So if you have a lot of ideas, follow them, don't censor them, and then when you're done, start to organize them and group them into piles. And I think you might be surprised with the kind of consistency that you might find in subsets of that work. I'm not a massive reader at this point. I used to be much more of a reader. I think my life has gotten to the point, in terms of fullness, in terms of teaching and family and all those things, where I just don't have a lot of time to pick up a novel or book in general and sort of really sit down with it. I read little bits and pieces of things at a time, and I try to keep track of those a little bit. But yeah, I think one thing that can be helpful is making lists as a way to organize, but really I would warn against self-censoring too much as a way to get to a kind of consistency. I think you'll begin to self-organize when you're ready.
Thanks. Okay, another question. This one is actually from Christina. In addition to photographs, are you still looking at and using late medieval Italian paintings for sources of motifs and gestures?
In some respect, yes. Christina's come by the studio a few times, and she knows I have piles of books everywhere, and I'm always looking through books. It's just sort of, it's comforting. It's a way that you can see how past artists solve pictorial problems. Sometimes I get stuck in my own kind of thinking, and it helps to see how someone else solved the problem. I think Piero really is a painter who I look at quite a bit. I don't know if I'm looking at anything specific with regards to a motif, but I think there are ways that he organizes compositionally that I continually come back to. And I think there's a, with Piero, there's a hidden geometry in his work that is just super helpful to remind myself about. Nicolas Poussin, a French 17th century French painter, is another painter who I go back to and more look at their compositions for help with things, to help solve problems.
Okay, another question, Enrico. This one's from Hillary. She says, I like the way the white gesso ground provides a separation between the areas of dark color. It reminds me of kind of a printmaking reference, technically like a monotype. Can you speak to the use of 3 fingers rather than 4 in your figures in your hands? They are otherwise so convincing and interesting choice.
Yeah, the whiteness of the canvas. Yeah, I mean it's really a technical way to help control color. I mean I think there's a way. There's just so many different ways to paint. I think if you go back and certainly if you think about printmaking in terms of technique and color separation, but also for me, I think as a student, realizing, thinking about and beginning to understand Cézanne's process and the white patches that he would leave open in his paintings. And I think there are various reasons why he did that, but one reason was really to control the color. And I think because he was such so interested in color and really expressing himself through painting, through color, so intensely. And, you know, I've read quite a bit about him. You know, if from what I gather, if he didn't understand what color to place in a particular place, he would leave that place open until he had a sense of what needed to go there. I didn't know that in the beginning. I just knew that it was sort of crazy that you could make a painting and leave open spots and the painting would still work. And certainly I think as you go through and you look at a progression of at least Western art history, you'll see some of that begin to come up, whether it's the white of the canvas or people actually going back in and putting white paint down. For me, it's really a way to help control the painting. And sometimes I need it, sometimes I don't. The 3 fingers is really a reference back to cartooning. I think earlier in the painting, 2014, 15, when the drawings and the paintings first came about, I really did not want to link too much a kind of, or a sense of realism with these really intense sort of motifs that I was painting. So more in the beginning, it's a little less now. The 3 fingers was a way to actually move the viewer out of thinking about the paintings as really sort of as too real. And so they could sort of exist more overtly in an imaginative kind of space. And that was one way to sort of create a little bit of space, I think, between some of the sort of violence and the sort of victims of that violence. So, and that might have been for myself as much as for the viewer, to psychologically make that sort of distance, which I'm actually just thinking about now. But yeah, a little less of that at this point, though.
Okay. Next question. This question is from Grant.
Uh-huh.
Do you allow ideas from one painting to merge into another one during the middle of your painting process, or do you try to keep those ideas separate, apart from including key details into multiple paintings like the fence?
In the beginning, I was pretty intent on just working from the drawing, and just sort of, there's usually something in the drawing that I found really compelling, and I wanted to sort of stick with that. Um, and I think my natural disposition, just if I'm left to my own devices, is to wander. I really am a sort of wandering person, and um, so I've been working this way for about 5 years, and I think just now, really in the past year, Grant, I've allowed myself to begin to change the original intent of the painting at some point during the process of making the painting. And it's scary because I know if I unleash, if I open that door, I have to be really careful. So increasingly now I'm allowing myself to let that happen. There are all kinds of aesthetic ramifications that make the work seem less consistent, and I think that's a whole nother sort of issue. Sort of an artificial consistency in the work that I think is something that you have to guard against. But yeah, increasingly now I'm allowing myself to let various things sort of happen in the painting, and not just sort of carry elements from one painting to the next.
Okay, and I think we have room for one more question, so I'm going to take it from our new fellowship student, Katrina Marr. She said your work has some roots. You said your work has some roots in Judeo-Christian school of thought and history. I was wondering if this is a heritage you identify with, or if it was through other artists. How did you decide what characteristics you took were appropriation versus authenticity? And in addition, would you consider yourself somewhat of a pop artist in your current practice?
I grew up a Christian. I grew up going to church. I grew up an Episcopalian. My family was not, they were observant, but my relationship to religion wasn't sort of completely immersive in a way. We were, I don't know how to really put it. We were observant, but there were stretches where sometimes we wouldn't go to church. As I grew up and went to college, I began to not go to church and began to develop my own relationship to that history and to that sort of religious practice that I was brought up in. I'm not going to get into the question of, am I a believer? I mean, I think, I don't know if I could answer that question. What's interesting to me about medieval European painting as a reservoir for these Judeo-Christian stories, which many of us inherited by being sort of a very mature colony of Europe, no longer a colony of Europe, but we sort of inherited that practice, is that you sort of see the roots. You see the roots of this If you are a Christian, um, you know, you see the roots of this religion that you've inherited in pictorial form. And so I was really interested in that use of painting in pictorial form to tell these stories. And a lot of those stories did have depictions of violence, or a subset of those paintings did have depictions of violence that were coming right out of the sort of literature of the Bible. I found that curious, that at some point as a painter, I was able to read a lot of those paintings sort of formally, just as pictorial constructions. But then there's also this story that for people who are practicing Christians, you know, could read and identify with. And you know, I think my relationship to those paintings is a lot more formal at this point. Do I consider myself a pop artist? I wouldn't consider myself, I wouldn't put myself in that category. I think there's certainly pop elements in the work, and I think there's a way that I want my work to be able to be read pretty easily by viewers. I wouldn't consider myself a figurative painter as well, strangely enough. I just, all of those sort of categories, I mean, I think you find all of those categories embedded in so many artists. And I think they're really useful categories, but no, I'm not a card carrying figurative painter or card carrying abstractionist or self-identifying pop artist. I'm just trying to sort of make images, you know, for myself and to sort of get them out in the world. So.
Great. Well, we're running out of time. It's 12:57. So any final thoughts, Enrico? Christina, do you have any final thoughts? I can unmute you. Maybe not. Did you unmute yourself?
I think if you, yep, there she is.
There she is. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and for Enrico for your time, for talking about your work. You've been very generous. There's a lot more to unpack. I have more, as always, you and I have such great conversations, so I'm hoping that we can continue. And I would encourage those of you who have been tested and are negative to come onto campus and to see Enrico's paintings. They're quite wonderful. And hopefully we will have another conversation scheduled for later during the run of Enrico's exhibition. So thank you again for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And I just want to thank Enrico again for your time. It's been wonderful. I encourage everybody to come to the museum if they are COVID negative, because the works are really beautiful in person. You will see so much more than you do, obviously, on a screen. And it is well worth the trip. Just want to say that next week at 12:10, we're going to have Victoria Elbrock for our Impact exhibition, who's showing her work upstairs. She's going to be the next artist on board, so please sign up for that and join us. And if anybody has any questions, please reach out to the museum. We're available to do tours online and do everything virtually if you don't feel safe coming to campus. We're able to provide a lot of information and material for you so that you can at least experience Enrico's show. So thank you all for coming.